Good afternoon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about two tools. Not everything we do at the Drought Center, but at least focus in on the Drought Monitor, which you've heard a little bit about this week given the drought here in California, and a new tool we just launched this spring, the Drought Risk Atlas. So one of the missions of the Drought Center as a boundary organization is to sort of bridge this chasm between science and policy, or science and the public. And so we go into the tools we develop from sort of beginning to end through research and development, and then sustaining them operationally is by working with the users who are going to use this tool to make sure that that tool is usable for them. So we have a feedback process and evaluation process, and they help us along the way. And I think that really gives what we do at the center a lot of value-added application. So the Drought Monitor didn't always look like what you see now in the media and on television. This is where we first started, back as an experimental product in 1999. And it was actually that drought in the northeast there, part of the country, in the upper right part of the country, the yellow turkey neck, if you will, that sort of precipitated moving this quickly from an experimental product to an operational weekly product. Through the cooperation and collaboration between USDA, NOAA, and the National Drought Mitigation Center. So this was pre, GIS and things were just starting to spin up. So this is really what the inside of my head looks like when I do it. To zoom in a little bit, you're trying to assimilate all this information prior to GIS, sort of with maps on your desk, maps on the floor, maps everywhere, and trying to bring it all into one cohesive picture, covering all the time scales, spatially and temporally, short-term, long-term drought, impacts, etc., and trying to get a sense of that and put it into a simple map that decision makers could use. So we didn't go at it alone. I think one of the real strengths of this product is the process. We have, and I'll show a graphic on this a little bit later, we have over 350 experts as part of the process that contribute feedback every week when drought's in their area. Of course, they're not all in drought every week, so it does vary. The very first thing we started back in 2000, I helped organize the first annual U.S. Drought Monitor Forum in Lincoln, where we brought in folks like ConAgra, commodity brokers, producers, the media, and other stakeholders to ask them what they think about this product and what's the strength of it, what's the weakness of it. And so we've held those ever since, where I'll show you a list of that here in a little bit as well. The other group we tapped into right away were the state climate offices and the regional climate centers, because they know that climate in their backyard a lot better than we do, trying to cover 50 states in 2.5 days. Since then, we've expanded to more tribal interaction. CocoRods has been a real benefit, this collaborative ground swelling sort of grassroots effort that collects rain, hail, and snow, and now drought. We worked with the CocoRods team to develop a drought interface into that, so that's really been beneficial. And then more recently, NIDIS and the State Drought Task Force, which hold their own webinars and briefings that the authors are able to sit in on and quickly assess the conditions from experts in their regions and get that into our product. So that's really a nice addition. So doing all that up front, we spread quickly from roughly 12 people that started with us back in 1999 to over 350 people as of this fall. And you can see the distribution. That number says 350. That's probably a lot more. It's probably closer to 500. We don't know exactly, because some of those states, Montana, Hawaii, others, they take the information and send it out to their drought task force. They serve as a single point of contact that come back to us. So really, there's a lot more people represented even than when it's on this map. These are where we've done these forums over the years. We typically try to target an area that's in drought or maybe just came out of drought as a way of going to where the memory's fresh on the drought, the impacts of the drought. You can see here, that's why we've targeted Reno. Coming in spring of April of 2015, we'll go out there. We're going to have the NIDIS regional pilot come in and talk about this a little bit on the last day. We're still formulating that agenda, but the Western Regional Climate Center, Desert Research Institute will be hosting that. So if you're interested in that, just Google Drought Monitor or go to the Drought Monitor website, and you'll find information as that becomes available. So we started out basically trying to cover the hydrologic system, everything from what's coming out of the sky, temperature, to what's in the ground and soil, stream flow, reservoirs, soil moisture, etc. But again, what sort of makes that unique is that local expert input. So these sort of products were the first ones we looked at, and since then we've brought a lot more of these products into play at a much finer spatial and temporal resolution. 98% of what we use is point-based or gridded, and a fine scale grid at that. No longer are we relying on climate divisions or say coarser county level data. By using new remote sensing tools, example the Vegetation Drought Response Index in the lower right, all the top two maps you can see, those are actually each day we update both stream flow and precipitation percentiles that come out of the Climate Prediction Center. Those vectors overlaying on top of those points are the drought monitor vectors. So now we're automated to the point where we're bringing in somewhere like 6 products each day, updating them automatically in the GIS, overlaying them on top of last week, and seeing where have we seen improvement or where do we think it's gotten worse. So this has really sped up the process. Things like National Land Data Assimilation System, the AHAPS River Forecast Center combined gridded precip product has really been a nice addition. And even newer tools like the Evaporative Stress Index. We're trying to look at these sort of tools because they can tell us when we're going into drought much more quickly. We've heard some talks this week about the Standardized Relative Humidity Index. These are the kinds of things, since ours isn't a fixed formula, we're flexible and adaptable. We can bring in new products as they become vetted and become accepted. We watch those for a year or so. Once we feel comfortable with them that they're doing a good job, once our 350 experts tell us that those products are doing a good job, we will then integrate those into the drought monitor process. So who's using the drought monitor? Well, you can see here we've got a pretty good public presence. You'll see it on the Weather Channel quite often in most of the major newspapers. But it's generating quite a bit of web traffic, and you can see the last bullet there. Everything from an individual farmer or rancher all the way up to the big businesses. These folks are using and downloading that data every week, and when it's if for some reason it wouldn't be there, we would hear them hollering. But we're approaching, I think, over 800 maps now on a weekly basis and haven't missed yet, even during the government shutdown. Policy-wise, this is where it probably got the most traction. It was first used in 2002 for livestock relief. After that, 2008 Farm Bill, followed by reauthorization in the 2014 Farm Bill. We've seen it also used by the IRS, the Secretary of Agriculture for fast-track declarations, and even the Centers for Disease Control to sort of target hotspots that might be things like West Nile, respiratory illnesses, things of that nature. And several states use it as part of their drought monitoring plan as well. So back in the height of the 2002 drought, you can see nearly 3/4 of the country, or the counties within those that are red, were affected by the drought, and the drought monitor sped up the paperwork process by several months. Okay, so in the last few minutes here, I'll talk a little bit about the new tool we just launched in the spring. And this essentially was building upon the work done back in the early 1900s as a collaborative effort between IBM, the Corps of Engineers, and NOAA. They started with the Historical Climate Network, which at that time was limited to around 1,000 stations. So we went through a pretty rigid QA/QC process over a few years to identify roughly 3,000 stations. So we've essentially tripled the number of stations we've looked at, and we've doubled the period of record for those stations, given that the pre-48 data had not been digitized when these folks undertook the first atlas. We also had the advantage of several more indices at our disposal that they did not when they did their first atlas, so we've been able to essentially give the users 5 indices to look at instead of 2. And so we're trying to capture these questions that we get all the time from the media, from our users, from governors, from congressional staffers, et cetera, is, how does this drought compare to last year? In the case of the California drought, how does this drought compare to the 70s, or is it the worst drought? And so we want to, give them some tools that they can visually look at the data, hopefully in a relatively easy manner. They can download that data freely if they so choose, and that's available as well, to compare droughts over time. This just gives you the distribution. We started with a minimum baseline of 40 years required. You You can see a pretty good spatial distribution, although there are some gaps in the west, but there's not much you can do about that. This gives you an idea of what the interface looks like once you come in. If you just Google Drought Risk Atlas, you'll find through the data access tabs along the top there the various indices, looking at drought periods, comparing those indices that you choose, and return frequencies. So in this case, I've chosen the blue circle there in cyan as the one to just show you some examples. In the left column, you can see the metadata there, shows the period of record. This station goes back 104 years to 1908, 95% complete. I should mention we also did an extensive serially complete data set work with the High Plains Regional Climate Center. They helped us flesh out those stations where we did have some missing data, but most of our stations were already in pretty good shape from a daily basis. From there, we aggregated to weekly and monthly to develop the indices over those time frames. If you come in, you can choose the date frame to choose on the top left there, or choose period of record by default, and choose your index and what time period you want to look at. So SPI is an example here. Zoom into that area in white there, and then just drag and click, and you can zoom right into the time series, double click, and come back out. So it's relatively intuitive to use that. Looking at drought periods for this station, you can quickly tell if you sort by duration which droughts lasted the longest. If you want to sort by chronological order, you can do that as well. A little bit of metadata on the top above the table where it says how many droughts have we seen at a -2 threshold. That's the circle in the lower left where you can choose which threshold you want to analyze. And then it'll rank these for you based on that particular indice and that particular threshold. So again, all on the fly, all they're pretty good shape, and then a bunch of pre-canned maps to follow as well. Looking at comparing indices, I think this is a pretty interesting tool where as you slide the bar along the left there where that circle is, as you go from left to right from January to the end of the month, or to the end of the year I should say, you can kind of see the indice values that you choose and how they go into drought or how they come out of drought, or which ones are showing it more quickly or which ones are lagging a little bit. It's just a tool to help people decide maybe which one they want to use as an index. And then frequencies. For each of those thresholds of those indice values, what sort of return periods do you see for those values from a planning perspective? A lot of folks have found that useful as well. Just showing you another example here of the heat map. We get a lot of calls from K through 12, even extension, where they want to do a quick look at, say, where drought's affecting an area. And as you scroll from the bottom, from left to right, for the period of record for that station, you can quickly see the drought years in yellow and red, or the wet years in blue and green. That's a quick way to just sort of visually scan across time and see when those major droughts occurred and how long they lasted. And then finally, I mentioned maps. So there'll be over 500,000 of these maps, all cached. We're still in the process of generating all those, but the SPI is already up there for all weeks and all years back to the early 1900s, and the other indices are being processed as we speak. You can quickly look at the droughts of recent past, the big drought in 2012, and also the wet year in 93 with all the flooding. Again, all these maps are cached, so it doesn't take time to generate them, but they're all at your fingertips very quickly. And the historic droughts where we don't have as much data points back in the 1930s, but for where we do have confidence in those points, we've done some maps for that area as well. So next steps for that, again, we went up through 2012. We want to keep updating that as resources allow. We're working on the hydrology side of this database now with streamflow data right now from USGS and their historical climate network. And then we want to combine this with indices, the Drought Monitor and the Drought Impact Reporter databases to make those more of a seamless, uniform tool to help people look at things like trends and frequencies and magnitudes of drought. So final thoughts, one thing we've seen over the last few years is an explosion of these composite hybrid indices at very fine resolution, sort of in a gridded format. Some examples there. I already touched on the land data simulation systems, the evaporative stress index, and veg dry. And we'll keep working on these sorts of tools with our users to develop, usable information that they can use, because our ultimate goal is that they can use this information to enact something within their drought plan or their personal operation, whether that's a local producer or a state or even a country. And with that, I'll wrap up, and if there's any questions, I'll take them. Thank you.